The Canadian Music Centre is a non-profit charity organization. The national office is in Toronto. There are branches in Montreal and Vancouver and Calgary, and also in Sackville and Brunswick. So it's a coast-to-coast organization. It is an organization that exists to promote and distribute the music of Canadian classical music composers. Now, those of us in the know realize that's never the right word, classical or serious music or concert music. I like long form music. I think that's probably the best term. But we use classical music because everybody thinks they know what that means. So we sort of go with that term. So Canada's classical music composers promote and distribute their music. 850 associate composers, of which we have one here, Carmen. Reid is one of our associates. Carmen, just wave your hands so that everybody knows where you are. And we have approximately 20,000 of their scores in our collection. And a number of those are recorded, and some in commercial format, compact disc. Anybody remember compact discs? But also the archival recordings from perhaps CMC concerts, or somebody's used their Zoom conferences, live studios to audio tape today's talk. And so those are all on our website, musiccentre.ca. And anybody can go there for free. You can create a login situation to access all of that archive of audio material. So there's a lot of recordings there as well. And the scores of the composers, as I mentioned, there's about 20,000 of the scores. Many of them are in digital format now. They have been scanned or been submitted by the composers in PDF format, so they're able to be viewed online. Perhaps 40, 50% of the scores you can actually see on the screen from the website as well. And we're working to advance our, if you will, print and bind feature off of the web to purchase on. There's a lot of stuff you can buy, CDs as well, musiccentre.ca. So that's just a quick overview of what we do. We're certainly loaning out scores all over the world. They're coming in, they're going out, the email. We used to have fax, but that's sort of old school. When fax came in, that's a big deal. But a lot of communications going across Canada, around the world, every day from our office. As I mentioned, one of the 5 branches of the Canadian Music Centre. So I want to tell you a bit about the CMC and where it came from and all those sorts of things. There's some interesting history, I think. And so this is our logo, of course. And that was a bit about us. And anybody know who this is? This is John Weinswag. John Weinswag, now deceased, was a lot of things in Canada. He was a very important composer, first of all. Secondly, as a university composition professor at the University of Toronto, he trained up, educated generations of composers in Canada through his position, as I mentioned, at the University of Toronto. But he was also a ne'er-do-well, not a ne'er-do-well, but he was also an agitator. He was also a lobbyist. He was also a communicator. He was an innovator as well. Of course, he is a member of the Order of Canada. And one of the things that he did was to create the Canadian League of Composers in the early 1950s. And that was an association that predated the Canadian Music Centre, and it's still in existence today. It's in effect the lobbying group for Canadian composers. One of the things that the Canadian League of Composers did was to speak to the early Canada Council. Now, the Massey report, Vincent Massey was a Governor General of Canada. And in the middle 1950s, he was commissioned to do a report on the state of culture in Canada. And the result of his report was to recommend the creation of a Canada Council for the Arts. And that came into being in 1957, 1958, something like that. One of the first things that happened was that the Canada Council received a brief from composers composers saying that, look, we have all of these opportunities around the world, but there's no circulating library. This is before photocopiers and those sorts of things. To get a score printed and copied and sent out wherever was a very arduous process back in those days, and they argued for the creation of a circulating library of Canadian music. So one of the first acts of the Canada Council was to create the Canadian Music Centre, and that took place December 31st, 1959, largely as a result of the efforts of John Weinswag and a number of other people as well. In Quebec, it was Jean-Papillon Couture, John Beckworth in Toronto, Phil Newlands, Harry Reid, and Harry Summers. A lot of composers that we know now as very important Canadian composers were active in that process to lobby for the creation of a circulating library of Canadian music. Well, that opened in Toronto in 1960, December 31st, 1959. And eventually, the Quebec people said, look, we would like to have a branch in Quebec. So in 1973, the Canadian Music Centre Quebec region office was opened in Montreal, and that continues to exist today. And this is where things get kind of interesting, because this individual, Richard Johnston, had been a professor of music at the University of Toronto, and once the fake dean of arts here at the University of Calgary, the fake dean of fine arts, his credentials were bogus. They hired him. I guess he figured he could pull the wool over the eyes of a little outpost in Western Canada. And but once he was unmasked as being a phony, they hired Richard Johnston to come in from Toronto. Richard was an American, but had been in Canada for many years at UT, and he was brought in to be dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts at the University of Calgary. Well, he was an associate composer at the Canadian Music Centre, and Richard began to lobby for the creation of a branch here, a western branch of the Canadian Music Centre to be located in Calgary. Well, Vancouver had the same idea as well. As it turned out, Vancouver won the battle or the contest for the ball. So in 1977, the Western Region branch of the Canadian Music Centre was in Vancouver. Well, not to be fazed by this experience, Richard Johnston was determined to bring the Canadian Music Centre to Calgary, and spoke to the National Board of the CMC and said, you know, I still want to do this. They said, well, there's no way. There's no money for it. It's just not possible. He said, well, what if I come up with the office space? And what if I come up with the money? They said, well, it's a different story. Let's see what you can do. So here at the university, Richard, oh, there's King Richard, by the way. This was, we did a tribute to Richard in 1992. And my predecessor, Claire Richard, was close friends with Richard. We did up this apron and this cape for Richard Johnston. That's just under the steps at the University Theatre. Kenneth Glazier was the University of Calgary librarian in the 1970s, and Richard spoke to Dr. Glazier to see, look, would you dedicate office space to the Canadian Music Centre to create a new Prairie Region office at the University of Calgary? And Dr. Glazier agreed and came up with the office space, our old office space. We were there until 2011 on the 9th floor of the McKinney Library Tower. It was a great space for us. Beautiful view, by the way. It was wonderful up there. And so those two guys came up with the plan to get the office space for the Canadian Music Centre Prairie Region, as I said, McKinney Library Tower. Well, then there was the matter of the money. And this was where a master stroke of political timing and genius took place, because you couldn't do what Richard did at that time. You couldn't do it now. You couldn't do it at the time. You did do it at the time. Horst Schmidt was the Minister of Culture for the Peter Lougheed government. And at that time, lottery funds, this was all new. The whole lottery business was new. And the funds were there. There was a lot of money there, but it was uncommitted. They had set up all the foundations and those sorts of things. So Richard went to Dr. Schmidt and said, could we get some funds for a startup, for an endowment, for the Canadian Music Centre, Prairie Regional Office to open in Calgary? And he was able to get $500,000 from the provincial government in lottery funds to set up the Alberta Foundation for the Canadian Music Centre. Of course, Schmidt is somebody that we revere very highly, and I believe Dr. Schmidt is still alive. So they had the office space, they had money. So in February of 1980, that office was opened here at the University of Calgary, the Canadian Music Centre. Anybody know who this is? No?
Alan McDonald.
Alan McDonald. Alan McDonald was the successor to Kenneth Glazier as the university librarian, and very interesting guy. My predecessor, as I mentioned earlier, Claire Richmond. Remember the old faculty club they used to gather at the faculty club in May? They got talking about the CMC and hatched this scheme. And Alan McDonald was a great deal maker, a very intelligent guy, a lot of fun as well, very outgoing, gregarious guy. And he was able to discover a program, and again, this doesn't exist, you couldn't do this today, where if you donated to a university, it would be double matched. So they cooked up this deal with Violet Archer, one of our great associate composers, who is a professor of composition at the University of Alberta. And she had won the Sir Frederick Haltane Prize from the province of Alberta, $50,000. And in talking to Claire Richmond, she said, really, I don't need this money. I feel very strongly about the Canadian Music Centre. I'd like to donate this whole corpus to the Canadian Music Centre. And Claire mentioned this to Alan. Alan knew about this program, so he got this $50,000 double matched through a program created as a fund, a permanent fund at the University of Calgary, to be called the Violet Archer Fund. And this $50,000 became $150,000, and this funds all of our library purchases at the Canadian Music Centre. All of the scores and the composers that they create every year are purchased for our library, along with recordings, periodicals, books as we need them, through the Violet Archer endowment. Violet Archer, Claire Richmond, and so this was the dedication ceremony, and I was working in the music department at the time, and Claire said, John, we really want you to be there, and I'm glad I did. I had no idea in 1986 that I would be eventually working at the Canadian Music Centre. So it gave me, I think, a bit of background that I wouldn't otherwise have. That's Claire. This is Violet, of course. That's Alan McDonald. You met him already. Anybody know who that is? Alan Bell. You're going to see Alan Bell towards the end of the presentation. I think you know why I'm going with that. We'll save that for a while. This is Gladys Odegaard. Gladys was the regional chairman of the Canadian Music Centre, Prairie Regional Council at the time. And she was the person that was in charge of, if you will, the board of directors of the CMC at the time, the Violet Archer endowment dedication. And it was a really wonderful event that consisted of a dinner and some ceremonies and those sorts of things. One of the aspects was a young girl came up and read a poem that she created for the occasion, and we were taking piano lessons. And it's funny because you see a picture, and I don't have it here, but I have it back at the office. But you see a picture of somebody that you met, and they're kind of frozen in time. So about 10 years later, she showed up at our door and said, "Oh, hi, I'm Ingrid." I was at the Violet Archer, and she was a grown woman, and it was, you can't be grown up. You have to still be that girl that was at the Violet Archer and down in 1986. So, very good event, and there we see the dedication plaque that was installed at the time. students in the library. So I've got a few shots here of things that have happened over the years. We try to get people into the library, obviously, to sign up the scores. And that's what we want to do. We want to get people playing the music. If you're a composer, what do you want for your music? You want people to study your music, to play your music, to record your music, and for that music to have a life in perpetuity. That's one of the great things about the CMC, is that it is, if you will, a perpetual archive of composers' music. For instance, John Weinsweig, now deceased, all of his scores are in our library, many of the recordings. So that's, I'm sure, was very important to Dr. Weinsweig during his lifetime, to know that his music would be preserved and promulgated after his death, because of course that's his life's work. These students have been given an assignment, high school students, I believe, to search out a composer and then find a score about them. And we have a lot of time. You can see there's lots of kind of hustle and bustle and activity. This is our old space. It's quarter to 11. Murray Schafer, probably Canada's best known composer internationally, is Murray Schafer. Murray creates scores that are often very artistic in their notation. These actually are in the University Archive. These University of Calgary Archive. These score samples are there in our archive here. And we had a display of this material, and Mr. Archer was on tour, and we were able to pick him up to have an event here at the CMC to have him speak. So that was a great occasion in the past, here at the university. So that's another shot of our office. One of our voting members had created this banner, I guess it was our 10th anniversary, and that was in Saskatoon. And so we saved that. We actually kept that up for years and years in the office, and you can see that, we had lots of stuff on the walls. Kind of a busy, kind of cluttery looking place. Very different from our new space. We haven't really put up anything up on the walls yet. But we really made it a point to have historical things. There's a poster from the Winnipeg Music Festival there. So we had donated this to our silent auctions and posters from North Calgary here, and associates at the time, Susan Fulmer. All right, and here's a reception that we had at the old office space, Alan Bell. This is Simone Auger, and she was executive director of the Canadian Music Centre, existing at the national office in Toronto. And this was Jack Barron's, an associate composer. He was up here for composers. Who's that? Huh?
That would be you.
That's me, yeah.
That's
So
you.
it was funny to discover this. I'm working back towards that weight, hopefully to get there soon. But yeah, it was kind of funny to discover. Actually going through all the old photos, it's really interesting to see all the events that we've done over the years. I had been out to Manitoba, and I've really taken quite seriously in my job the idea to not just be the Calgary Music Centre, but to really try to get out on the road to obviously Edmonton, Regina, Saskatoon, Brandon, Winnipeg. I go to Winnipeg every year for the New Music Festival there. Just returned from Winnipeg, where I was there for the Juno Awards, and we put on a classical music showcase there. I'll tell you more about that in a little while. So this time we had a Manitoba composer display. Now, I brought out this photo because I want to point out this individual here. This is Bill Pura, William Pura. Bill is an associate composer. He's in Winnipeg. I'll just tell you about everybody else. Richard Johnston. This is Roberta Stephen. Roberta is in her 80s now. She's a composer here in Calgary, and has also been a music educator, and a composer, music educator, voice teacher, and music publisher. We're going to be doing a tribute to Roberta this fall, at the end of September 28th, I think is our date. We'll working on that now. Arthur Ward, deceased, wrote a lot for Oregon. Kenneth Nichols from Brandon, composer. David McIntyre from Regina, Calgary native. And Howard Bashaw. So we took this picture of a number of associate composers when we had an event going on. I guess regional council meeting was a real luncheon, as we always do. But Bill was on the regional council, and there was one day we came back from lunch, and I love to tell this story because it's kind of a joke on me as well, because we had a poster that had been sent to us in the mail about Prairie Music Awards, and we put it up. We put up posters that people send us. As we came back from lunch one day, regional council meeting, Bill said, pointed to this poster, he said, "John, we should be there." And I said, "Beware, Bill." He said, "At the Prairie Music Awards." And I said, "Bill, it's all rock and roll." And he said, "Exactly." And I went, "I'm sorry, buddy, you lost me. Yeah, I'm up to secret. I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you kind of explain yourself?" Well, what he meant was, and he was right, he said, the Prairie Music Awards claim to be music awards, and they should include all genres. And so we discussed this with our regional council and came up with a plan. It involved me lobbying. Okay, so they said, "We want you to go," and Bill helped out, and David Dog and a few other people, going to the Prairie Music Alliance and saying, as Bill said so eloquently, he said, "You should have classical music in your purview. You should create some classical music awards." And in 2002, they created the first of two awards called the Outstanding Classical Recording, or Classical Recording of the Year. Now, the next step in this process was to try to create a parallel situation to the Junos, in which there is a classical composition category. And of course, in representing composers, we're very interested in that. And so we lobbied for that as well. They said no. Well, undeterred, we went back and read it up a little bit. They said no again. But we were undeterred. We were going to make sure that this happened. We just realized we needed to communicate more effectively, and that's what we did. And there were really people who didn't know, much about genres of music in their own areas. And so we actually went to a meeting with them, and they said, the board said, "Are there recordings of Prairie composers' compositions?" Well, I had a satchel, one of those satchels from the back, full of CDs. And there was about 50 or 75 of them. And I put them all on the tabletop and started passing them around. And passed around copies of my newsletter and those sorts of things. And as a matter of fact, as they were looking, one of them looked at the newsletter and they said, "Oh no, they published our no letter." We did. We published their letter of refusal in our Prairie Sounds newsletter. And they realized to their horror that they were looking, not so good for having that published in our newsletter. Well, they were convinced, and they have since, it was about 2004, I guess, that they started. So we've had about 9, this will be our 10th year of the composition, it'll be the 13th year with the Outstanding Classical Recording. So that's an example of an innovation of the Canadian Music Centre. It all came from Bill's comment that day. Now, I saw Bill this weekend, and we had brunch together with a number of us, and we would like to eventually see National Classical Music Awards created that can have more categories. The Junos has 4 categories, which is good, but there's a lot more going on in classical music composition than just can be recognized by those 4 awards. One of the other things that we did was to start the Emerging Composer competition with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra New Music Festival. We have a donor, a wonderful donor, Winnipeg anonymous donor, who wanted to do something with Canadian music and hadn't found that the Winnipeg Symphony had responded in a way that he might have hoped. But came to us and said, "We'd like to do something." We said, "What is it you're thinking about?" He wanted to create an award, a composition award for emerging composers for young people. So we came up with the parameters, some sort of prairie association, born in the prairies or studying in the prairies or living in the prairies, some concrete type of prairie region association, and 35 years of age or under. Here I am on stage at the Winnipeg New Music Festival earlier this year in February. Royden, CTSE, Royden was the winner of our competition, and as part of his prize, there's a cash award. His expenses get paid to come to the festival, and also that his piece is performed by the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra live on stage, and we kind of invite them on an annual basis to present that award on stage. So we're into about 10 or 12 years of doing the emerging composer competition at the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra New Music Festival. I guess I'll mention two more things about that. The first is that we have received a little bit of feedback that it might be an idea to open up the emerging composer competition to all ages. And that's an interesting consideration because there are some people who might be 80 who are still emerging as composers. Perhaps they've had a whole other career, they've retired, and they've decided to dedicate themselves to composition, and they're not really the opportunities. Those sorts of things. So we're open to that idea and are considering making that change. We will probably do that this year. And this leads into my second point. The Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra is a major performer of Canadian music. It's a new music festival, always has a Canadian music component, and they've applied to the Carnegie Hall competition, and were indeed invited to perform at Carnegie Hall May the 8th, so about a month from now we will be playing in Carnegie Hall. I'm going to New York, and I'm going to be meeting with Alexander Micklethwaite while I'm there, in part to discuss the parameters of the emerging composer competition and other aspects of Canadian music within the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra and the Music Festival and those sorts of things. So it's premature to make an announcement, but we are taking a good hard look at it. Alexander is in favor of the change, and our donor is open to it. So I think we will be moving in that direction to change some of the parameters of the emerging composer competition. Canadian Music Center, Prairie Regional Director. We all know this guy, Tom Hickerson, is our current librarian here at the university. And it was Tom who gave us our new space, which is here on the 3rd floor, as we say, the TFDL, Taylor Family Digital Library. And we moved in 2011. Having been there for, 1990, 2000, 2010, 30 plus years, it was quite a big undertaking to move, and kind of emotional in some ways because so much had happened in the old space over so many years, and as one investigates all the nooks and crannies, as Lindsay will bear me out, and Marilyn, there was things that had been accumulated, and indeed, where have we put them? You've all moved at various times, and just where is such and such, and so box, and we're still a little bit in that process of finding some little artifacts, but everything, the library's intact, all the recordings are intact, we're operationally, totally 100% up and running, in very, very good shape, in a modern space, a beautiful modern space here at the university, room 320, the Taylor Family Digital Library. So Tom, kudos go to Tom for seeing the wisdom of having the Canadian Music Center here at the university, and the Canadian Music Center here in the library. And so kudos to our friend Tom. Fun photo. Alan Bell, just a couple of nights ago, was awarded the Juno Award for his piece on Prairie Sounds imprint of center discs called Field Notes. And two things come to mind with this area of the recordings. first of all, is the imprint itself, and secondly, the work that we've been doing with the Junior Awards and the Western Canadian Music Awards. In 2003, as part of our New Music in New Places special project, we had reading sessions with the Regina Symphony Orchestra. And this would, composers could submit orchestral scores, and they would receive a reading with the Regina Symphony. We were able to make an archival tape, which was okay at the time. And one of the things that we did afterwards, as we always tried to do, is to get together and socialize. And at the they call it the Sask, the Hotel Saskatchewan, has a beautiful lounge there, quite a large lounge, in a very historic hotel, kind of like our Palace Hotel in Calgary. But a beautiful lounge there, and there were about, I would say, 10 or 12, 15 of us in a very large circle. And as we began to talk, composers expressed their difficulty in getting their projects, recording projects, through fruition in center discs. And it was understandable because there's such a great wealth of composers in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and which is where the composers tend to flock. And so there were so many great projects coming to the center discs jury on an annual basis from those centers that the Prairie projects were just not getting through. But there were some worthy projects on the go. And so one of the thoughts that came out of that meeting to my boss, Elizabeth Beale, now just retired as the executive director of the CMC. And she graciously accepted the idea to create an imprint within the Canadian Music Center Discs label, and we call that Prairie Sounds. Our newsletter is called Prairie Sounds. The imprint on the record label is called Prairie Sounds. And so we began releasing projects, jurying them independently, but according to all the parameters of the record label, that they have to be artistically sound projects. It's not a vanity label. You know, there may, in some cases, be funding available at the outset, but that's never a consideration in the acceptance or approval of a project. It's always the thematic content and the artistic integrity of a project. And so we have, over the years since then, it took a few years to get it going, to get it going. So I think it was 2005, 2006 that we released our first Prairie Sounds imprint on center discs project. Over the years, we've had a number of nominations for the Western Canadian Music Awards. We won 3 of them. Elizabeth Rom, Alan Gilliland, and Pat Carraway have all won WCMA awards for, I believe each one of them has been a composition award. But this is our first Juno. So on Saturday night at the Gala Banquet and Awards in Winnipeg, I was there, I was sitting at the table with Alan, and of course none of us knew who was going to win. And it was very exciting. And this is a picture, they whisk them away after they make the presentation. By the way, the one they give them doesn't have the name on it. They have one Juno award, and they give it out to everybody, and then they make up the individual ones and send them to them afterwards. So anyway, they take them backstage for interviews and photographs, and this was a photo that they took in the back room after the ceremony. And so the university was able to get a copy of this, and we were able to send it to us and turn it around pretty quickly. So I'm very glad to be able to have this for us here today to show you with Alan's Juno up in midair. The other aspect, the record label Juno here, but also the aspect of our classical music showcase that we put on an annual basis with the Juno Awards and also with the Western Canadian Music Awards. This is another innovation that we come up with. The Prairie Sounds imprint, the Emerging Composer competition, the Classical Music Showcase at the awards shows. I was privileged to be a member of the host committee of the 2008 Juno Awards. I was chair of the bid committee, which raised $1 million to bring the WC and the Juno, to Calgary. And part of what we did in preparation for this was in 2006 to go to Halifax. And as we were touring the venues there, it was the hockey arena, I believe, at the time, the Vice President of Events, Chris Topping, and I had a conversation as we were on this tour. And Juno Fest. Well, now there's a festival of performances as part of Juno Week. It moves around from city to city around Canada. And generally it's, again, rock and roll bands playing in bars or venues in the local area. And sometimes blues, sometimes jazz, sometimes country, folk, etc. But I said, well, classical music has never been a part of this. And I think I asked why. Well, the answer was something like, it just never has been. And I said something like, well, could it be? Sure. Is there any money available? Well, no, there's no money. So what if we come, sort of like a Richard Johnston type of answer, what if we come up, or question, what if we come up with the money? And we had access to a special project fund at the time, which we called Music Places. So in 2008, or 2007, we mounted the first one at the Western Canadian Music Awards using an A-rate performance through CBC. It's hard to get that anymore. But Shauna Powers and John helped us to arrange that. So we had the first classical showcase in 2007 at Moose Jaw at the WCAs, and the first Juno classical showcase with the assistance of our partner Honan's competition at the Grand Theatre in Calgary as a part of the Junos in Calgary in 2008. And so we've done 6 at the Junos. This was our 6th annual at the Junos in Winnipeg. Big success. And we've done 7 of them with the Western Canadian Music Awards, 8th this year. So that's 13 classical music showcases that we've done over the years, and we've gotten to be pretty good at it. First of all, at the artistic side of contacting nominees, and secondly, at the production side, the media side, generating an audience. Part of this came out of a conversation with the president of CARIS, the Canadian Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. CARIS is the producer of the Junos, and asking about the idea of getting classical music more on the program, because if you've seen the Juno Awards from the TV perspective, there's no classical music there as a part of it. And so I was concerned, interested, I guess would be the right word, to get classical music more on that particular venue. And Melanie very pointedly said, John, they don't even show up to accept their awards. And her point was well taken, because the classical, the 4 awards, are the most, I think, of any genre in the Junos. So kudos to CARIS for having those awards. But I think they rightly feel, as she indicated, that it's, let's see the participation from the nominees to show up for the awards. So this was the prime reason for us to start the showcase. For instance, at WCNA's here in Calgary, all 10 nominees were represented. So we did the showcase. We had all 10 nominees would be there to accept the award. And indeed, we had Alan Bell's piece played at our showcase, and we had some great star power. We had James Campbell. If he's not the best clarinetist in the world, I don't know who is. And he played with Calgary's own Land's End Ensemble. They're very good. That's a very good. If you get a chance to hear Land's End Ensemble, please do so. Very good. And they played field notes, so people in Winnipeg at our event had a chance to hear the piece, the day of the evening in which it was being presented, and it indeed won. So that was a great thing for us to have been able to present in concert what turned out to be the Juno Award-winning classical composition of the year. We had some very good star power. Isabel Bayrak-Darien, and she is a great singer, an international career. She played Stuart Goodyear on piano, fantastic. Brought down the house with his Beethoven, standing ovation at the end of the concert, fantastic. And we had 2 Order of Canada composers with Alan Bell and Stephen Chapman. So the classical music showcase at the Junos and at the WCNAs, our program is moving forward. The Prairie Sounds in Print, one of our important programs moving forward. In the current life of the Canadian Music Centre, Prairie Region. So, that is a very brief look at some of the fascinating history of the CMC Prairie region, some of the characters involved. I thank you for being